I never thought my life would be turned upside down by a garden shed, but that's exactly what happened on a muggy July evening in Maple Creek, Florida. My name is Walter Zimmerman, and I've been practicing law for 15 years, specializing in property disputes and civil litigation. I moved into the Whispering Pines subdivision 3 years ago, attracted by the large lots and mature trees that provided a buffer between houses. What I didn't account for was the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, run with dictatorial precision by Patty Anderson, a woman whose dedication to property values bordered on religious fervor. The conflict that would eventually land several people in jail began innocently enough. I'd built a small shed in my backyard the previous autumn, a simple 10 by 12 structure where I could store my lawn equipment, and the kayak I occasionally took out on Lake Maple. I'd checked the HOA bylaws before construction, confirmed the dimensions were within guidelines, and even used the exact shade of taupe specified in the architectural standards. I'd filled out the required paperwork and received written approval from the architectural committee. But Patty had not been on the committee when my shed was approved. She'd been elected HOA president just 2 months ago and had immediately begun what many neighbors were calling the Great Purge, a systematic campaign to address every single violation, no matter how minor, throughout the community. I was in my home office that Thursday evening, preparing for a court appearance the next day, when my security app chimed. Someone was in my backyard. At first, I assumed it was just a neighborhood cat. There were several that roamed freely, despite the HOA's strict pet containment policy. But when I checked the notification, I saw 3 figures moving purposefully toward my shed. I switched to the camera feed mounted on my back porch and felt a surge of disbelief as I watched 2 men in uniform and Patty Anderson approach my shed. The men wore khaki pants and navy blue polo shirts with Whispering Pines security embroidered on them. One was carrying what looked like bolt cutters. "What the hell?" I muttered, grabbing my phone and heading for the back door. By the time I got outside, one of the guards was already working on the padlock securing my shed. "Excuse me," I called out, striding across my lawn. "What exactly do you think you're doing on my property?" Patty turned, her face a mask of righteous indignation beneath her perfectly highlighted bob. She wore a pink cardigan despite the Florida heat and clutched a tablet to her chest like it contained state secrets. "Mr. Zimmerman," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone that suggested I was an unruly child. "We're conducting an inspection of your shed. We've received reports that it violates several HOA regulations." "Reports?" I asked, coming to a stop about 10 feet from the trio. "From whom? And more importantly, why are you attempting to break into my private property instead of contacting me directly?" "You were sent 3 notices," Patty replied, tapping at her tablet, "and you failed to respond to any of them." "I never received any notices," I said, pulling out my phone. "And even if I had, that doesn't give you the right to break into my property. Step away from my shed now, or I'm calling the police." The security guard with the bolt cutters, his name tag read Tom, looked uncertain and glanced at Patty. "Mrs. Anderson, maybe we should continue with the inspection," Patty interrupted firmly. "As per Section 8.3 of the HOA covenant, the association has the right to inspect any external structures to ensure compliance. Mr. Zimmerman signed this agreement when he purchased the property." I knew exactly what Section 8.3 said, because I'd read the entire covenant before buying my house. Section 8.3 permits scheduled inspections with 48 hours written notice and owner consent or presence. I received no notice, and I certainly haven't consented. What you're doing is criminal trespassing and attempted breaking and entering. I raised my phone, showing them that I was recording. I'm an attorney, Mrs. Anderson. I suggest you think very carefully about your next move. The second guard, a younger man whose name tag identified him as Ryan, shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Anderson, I don't think the board has authorized this inspection, Patty snapped, and our legal counsel has confirmed our right to access. That was when Tom made the fateful decision to snap the bolt cutters closed on my padlock. The metallic crunch seemed to echo across the yard. That's it, I said, pressing the call button on my phone. I'm contacting the police. Go ahead, Patty said with a dismissive wave. The police understand how HOAs work. They won't interfere with legitimate HOA business. I put the phone to my ear as the dispatcher answered. Yes, I need to report a breaking and entering in progress at 4872 Magnolia Drive in Whispering Pines. There are 3 individuals who have just cut the lock on my shed and are illegally entering my property. As I provided my information to the dispatcher, Tom had already swung the shed door open, and Patty was marching inside with her tablet, snapping photos. The suspects are still on the property, I continued. One is Patty Anderson, the HOA president, and 2 others are wearing uniforms identifying them as Whispering Pines Security. When I ended the call, I addressed the 3 trespassers again. The police are on their way. I suggest you leave my property immediately. Patty emerged from the shed, her expression triumphant. Just as I suspected, this shed is in violation of at least 3 HOA regulations. The interior shelving exceeds the permitted height, you're storing unapproved items, and the window installations don't match the approved plans. None of those claims are true, I replied calmly. But even if they were, it wouldn't justify breaking and entering. We did not break in, Patty insisted. We conducted an authorized inspection as permitted by the HOA covenant that you signed. I'll let the police explain the law to you, I said. But here's a preview. Florida Statute 810.08 defines trespass in a structure as entering or remaining in a structure without authorization. You are currently trespassing. Florida Statute 810.02 defines burglary as entering a structure with the intent to commit an offense inside. You broke my lock with the intent to enter without permission, which constitutes burglary. The younger guard, Ryan, had gone pale. Mrs. Anderson, I think we should leave. Stay right where you are, I countered. The police will want to speak with all 3 of you. This is ridiculous, Patty huffed. We're enforcing community standards that maintain property values for everyone, including you, Mr. Zimmerman. If you had simply responded to our notices I never received, I interrupted. Did you send them certified mail? Do you have proof of delivery? Because I check my mailbox daily and monitor all deliveries with a doorbell camera. Patty's lips thinned. They were delivered by community staff. So no proof of delivery, I noted. Convenient. The wail of approaching sirens cut through the evening air, and I saw real worry flash across Tom's face. Ryan was already backing away toward the side gate. Nobody leaves, I said firmly. You've committed a crime on my property, and now you'll face the consequences. 2 police cruisers pulled up in front of my house, and moments later, Officers Jenkins and Rodriguez appeared around the side of the house. I'd worked with both of them on cases before Maple Creek wasn't a large community, and the legal circle was even smaller. Mr. Zimmerman, Officer Jenkins nodded in greeting. What's going on here? These 3 individuals cut the lock on my shed and entered without permission, I explained, showing him the broken padlock. I have the entire incident recorded on my security cameras. including the moment they destroyed my property to gain entry. He's exaggerating, Patty interjected. We're the HOA board and security team conducting a routine inspection as permitted by the community covenant. Officer Rodriguez turned to her. Madam, did you have the homeowner's permission to enter this structure? We don't need permission, Patty insisted. The HOA covenant gives us the right to inspect external structures. I pulled up the relevant section on my phone and showed it to Officer Jenkins. Section 8.3 requires 48 hours written notice and owner consent or presence. I received no notice, and they proceeded despite my explicit demand that they stop. Jenkins nodded slowly, then turned to the security guards. Were you aware of these requirements? Tom looked at the ground. Mrs. Anderson assured us that the inspection was authorized and legal. So you took it upon yourself to destroy private property based on her assurance? Jenkins asked. She's the HOA president, Tom said weakly. Being an HOA president doesn't exempt someone from state law, Officer Rodriguez said. She turned to Patty. Madam, I'm going to need to see some identification. This is outrageous, Patty sputtered. I'm protecting property values. That's my job. Your job doesn't include breaking and entering, I said, or destruction of property, or trespassing. Officer Jenkins had pulled out his notepad and was taking statements. Mr. Zimmerman, do you want to press charges? Absolutely, I replied without hesitation. Breaking and entering, trespassing, destruction of property, and any other applicable charges. You can't be serious, Patty gasped. Over a shed inspection. No, Mrs. Anderson, I corrected her. Over your criminal behavior. Being on an HOA board doesn't put you above the law. The next hour was a blur of activity. The officers examined the broken lock, reviewed my security footage on my phone, and took statements from everyone involved. Patty maintained her indignation throughout, insisting that she was simply doing her duty as HOA president, and that I was being unreasonable. When Officer Jenkins finally said, Patricia Anderson, Thomas Miller, and Ryan Johnson, you're under arrest for criminal trespassing, breaking and entering, and destruction of property, I felt no satisfaction, only a weary sort of resolution. The neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk to watch as all three were handcuffed and placed in separate police cars. I heard murmurs and saw phones recording the scene. By morning, this would be all over the neighborhood social media groups. As the police cars drove away, my next-door neighbor, Olivia Carter, approached with a look of disbelief on her face. Walter, what on earth happened? They arrested Patty. She broke into my shed, I explained simply. With her security goons. My God, Olivia said, shaking her head. I mean, she's been on a power trip since she took over, but breaking and entering, that's a whole new level. She seems to think the HOA covenant supersedes state law, I said, rubbing my temples. A headache was forming. It doesn't. What happens now? Olivia asked. They'll be booked, I said. Probably released on bail pending a court date, and I'll need to talk to the rest of the board about replacing her as president. Good luck with that, Olivia snorted. The board is basically her fan club. I sighed, looking back at my violated shed. Then it might be time for some new board members too. I had no idea then just how complicated things would get, or that this was only the beginning of a neighborhood war that would eventually expose corruption far beyond a simple shed inspection. The next morning, I called my office and explained that I needed to take a personal day. My associate could handle the court appearance. It was a routine motion that didn't require my specific expertise. Instead, I spent the morning documenting everything that had happened, making copies of the security footage, and researching the legal framework governing HOAs in Florida. Around noon, my doorbell rang. When I answered, I found Harold Nielsen, the HOA vice president, standing on my porch with an uncomfortable expression. Harold was in his 60s, retired from a career in banking and generally one of the more reasonable board members. "Walter," he said with a nod, "I was hoping we could talk." I invited him in and offered coffee, which he declined. We sat in my living room, the large windows overlooking the meticulously maintained front lawn that met every HOA specification. "I want to apologize for what happened yesterday," Harold began. "That was not how the board operates. Or at least, not how it should operate." "I appreciate that, Harold," I said. "But I'm curious, did the board actually authorize Patty to conduct that inspection?" Harold fidgeted with his wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd noticed at board meetings. "There was a discussion about shed compliance at the last meeting. Patty raised concerns about several properties, including yours. The board agreed that notices should be sent and inspections scheduled according to protocol. But did you authorize her to cut locks and force entry?" "Absolutely not," Harold said firmly. "That's why I'm here. The board is in emergency session right now, discussing how to handle this situation. Patty was released on bail this morning, and she's insisting that she was acting within her authority." "She wasn't," I said simply. "And she's now facing criminal charges." "Yes, well." Harold cleared his throat. "The board was hoping we might be able to resolve this internally. If you were willing to drop the charges, the HOA would cover the cost of a new lock, and we would ensure nothing like this happens again." I leaned back, studying the man across from me. "Harold, Patty didn't just make a mistake. She deliberately violated state law. She brought armed security guards onto my property and broke into my shed. That's not something that can be fixed with a new padlock." "Armed?" Harold's eyes widened. "The security guards were armed. They carry tasers," I clarified. "But yes, they're armed security, and they followed Patty's orders to commit a crime." Harold removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. "This is a mess." "It is," I agreed, "and it goes beyond yesterday's incident. I've been reviewing complaints from other homeowners. There's a pattern of overreach and selective enforcement that could expose the entire board to liability." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that the board needs to take a hard look at how it's operating," I said. "And perhaps consider new leadership." Harold nodded slowly. "Many of us have been concerned about Patty's approach since she became president, but she's very persuasive and no one wanted to rock the boat." "Well, the boat's been rocked now," I said, "and I'm not dropping the charges. What Patty did was criminal, and there need to be consequences." "I understand," Harold said, rising to his feet. "I'll convey your position to the board." After Harold left, I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat at my kitchen counter, laptop open. I'd started compiling HOA violations and complaints from other homeowners, people who'd reached out to me after seeing the arrests the night before. The pattern was troubling. Homeowners who had opposed Patty during the board election seemed to be targeted for violations, while her supporters were given leeway. Even more concerning were the financial records I'd requested months ago, but never received, records that should be available to any homeowner upon request. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Emergency HOA meeting called for 7 p.m. tonight. You going?" I texted back. "Wouldn't miss it." The community center was packed by 6:45 p.m. I arrived early and took a seat near the back, observing as neighbors filed in, many of them whispering and casting glances my way. The energy in the room was tense, a mixture of curiosity, outrage, and anticipation. At exactly 7 p.m., Harold called the meeting to order. The board members sat at a table at the front of the room, with one conspicuous empty seat, Patty's. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, Harold began. As many of you are aware, we've had an incident involving our board president and a homeowner. The board felt it was important to address this situation promptly and transparently. A hand shot up from the middle of the room. It belonged to Karen Williams, one of Patty's closest allies in the neighborhood. Where is Patty? Shouldn't she be here to defend herself, Mrs. Anderson was invited to attend, Harold replied carefully. She declined on advice of her attorney. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I think we all deserve to know exactly what happened, Karen insisted. All I've heard are rumors and one-sided accounts. Harold looked uncomfortable. We're limited in what we can discuss about an ongoing legal matter, but essentially, there was an unauthorized entry into a homeowner's property that resulted in arrests. Unauthorized by whom? Karen pressed. The HOA has the right to inspect properties. I decided it was time to speak up. Rising from my seat, I addressed the room. The HOA has the right to inspect properties after providing 48 hours written notice and obtaining homeowner consent, as clearly stated in Section 8.3 of our covenant. Mrs. Anderson provided no notice and proceeded despite my explicit objection. She instructed security personnel to cut the lock on my shed. Those actions constitute criminal trespassing and breaking and entering under Florida law. The room erupted in voices. Some neighbors were nodding in agreement, while others looked skeptical. Order, please, Harold called, tapping his gavel. Mr. Zimmerman is correct about the inspection protocols. The board acknowledges that proper procedures were not followed in this case. So what happens now? Someone called from the back. Harold cleared his throat. The board has voted to temporarily remove Mrs. Anderson from her position as president, pending resolution of the legal matters. I will be serving as acting president in the interim. More murmurs, louder this time. Additionally, Harold continued, we are commissioning an independent review of all HOA procedures and enforcement actions over the past 6 months to ensure that our covenant is being applied fairly and consistently. That announcement drew both applause and protests. This is a witch hunt. Karen Williams declared, standing up. Patty has done more for this community than anyone. Property values are up 7% since she took over. At what cost? I countered. Selective enforcement, harassment, criminal activity. That's not proper HOA management, that's abuse of power. You're just angry because she called you out on your violations, Karen shot back. What violations? I asked calmly. My shed was approved by the architectural committee before construction. I have the documentation right here. I held up a folder. And even if there were violations, which there aren't, that wouldn't justify breaking and entering. Harold rapped his gavel again. Please, let's maintain decorum. The purpose of this meeting is to inform the community of the board's interim actions and to hear concerns. Mr. Zimmerman has raised legitimate legal issues that the board takes seriously. For the next hour, the meeting alternated between procedural updates from the board and heated comments from homeowners. It became clear that the community was deeply divided: those who supported Patty's strict enforcement versus those who felt the HOA had become too intrusive and punitive. When the meeting finally adjourned, I was approached by several homeowners who wanted to share their own stories of run-ins with Patty and the HOA. One elderly woman had been fined for having a bird feeder visible from the street. A young family had received violation notices because their toddler's tricycle had been left on their front porch overnight. A Vietnam veteran had been threatened with legal action over a small American flag displayed in a flower pot. As I listened to these accounts, A clearer picture emerged of how Patty had been operating using HOA rules as weapons rather than as tools for community maintenance. But there was something else brewing beneath the surface, something that didn't quite add up. Mr. Zimmerman. A soft voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to find a young woman I recognized as working in the HOA office. "Can I talk to you privately? It's about Mrs. Anderson." "Of course," I said, guiding her to a quiet corner of the now emptying room. "What's your name?" "Melissa Johnson," she said, nervously glancing around. "I work part-time in the HOA office, handling paperwork and maintenance requests." "What did you want to tell me, Melissa?" She lowered her voice. "After the meeting last night, Mrs. Anderson came into the office and started shredding documents, a lot of documents. I tried to see what they were, but she ordered me to leave. When I came in this morning, the shredder bin had been emptied, and several files were missing from the cabinet." "What kind of files?" I asked, my lawyer instincts immediately alert. "Financial records, mostly. Vendor contracts, invoices, and the complaint file with your name on it." "My complaint file," I frowned. "I never filed any complaints." Melissa nodded quickly. "That's what was weird." There were files for several homeowners who had never actually submitted complaints, but these files were used to justify inspections and fines. This was getting more interesting by the minute. "Melissa, would you be willing to make a formal statement about what you saw?" She hesitated. "I need this job, Mr. Zimmerman." "I understand," I assured her. "But if there's financial impropriety happening, it's better to be on the right side of it when it comes to light, and it will come to light." After some more reassurance, Melissa agreed to document what she'd seen. As she left, I pulled out my phone and called an old friend from law school who now worked in the white-collar crime division of the state attorney's office. "James," I said when he answered, "I think I might have something interesting for you. How do you feel about corrupt HOAs?" The next morning I was back at my law office, catching up on the work I'd missed. My paralegal, Vanessa, had organized my files immaculately as always, with priority matters flagged for my immediate attention. "Your 10 o'clock is here," she said, poking her head into my office. "Mr. Nielsen." I was surprised. I hadn't scheduled a meeting with Harold. "Send him in." Harold looked even more uncomfortable than he had the day before. He declined coffee again and sat rigidly in the chair across from my desk. "Walter," he began, "I've been doing some digging since our emergency meeting. What I've found? Well, I'm not sure what to do with it." "What have you found, Harold?" He placed a USB drive on my desk. "Financial records that don't match what's been presented to the board. Vendor contracts with companies that don't seem to exist. And something else, surveillance reports on certain homeowners, including you." "Surveillance reports," I repeated, picking up the drive. "Patty hired a private security firm beyond our regular community guards," Harold explained. "They've been monitoring problem residents and reporting back to her. The invoices were disguised as landscaping expenses. This was even worse than I'd suspected." "Who authorized these expenditures?" "That's the thing," Harold said, looking pained. "The treasurer's signature is on the authorizations, but Douglas swears he never signed them. I think Patty might have been forging signatures." I plugged the USB drive into my computer. "How did you get access to these records?" "I've been treasurer before," Harold admitted. "I still have the backup codes to the financial software." When Melissa mentioned missing files to me this morning, I decided to look into it myself. As I scanned through the files, my concern deepened. This went beyond HOA overreach into potential fraud, forgery, and misappropriation of funds. The surveillance reports were particularly disturbing, detailed accounts of homeowners' comings and goings, visitors, even photographs taken through windows. "Harold, this is serious criminal activity," I said finally. "Have you shown these to anyone else?" "Just you," he said. I wasn't sure who to trust on the board. Some of them are very loyal to Patty. "I have a contact at the state attorney's office," I told him. "With your permission, I'd like to share these files with him." Harold nodded grimly. "That's why I brought them to you. Something very wrong has been happening in our community, and it needs to stop." After Harold left, I called James again and explained what I'd discovered. He agreed to meet me for lunch to review the files. Just as I was preparing to leave for lunch, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Walter Zimmerman," I answered. "Mr. Zimmerman, this is Detective Roberts with the Maple Creek Police Department. We're investigating a break-in at the Whispering Pines HOA office that occurred last night. Your name has come up in connection with some missing files." My stomach tightened. "I haven't been near the HOA office, Detective. Nevertheless, we'd appreciate if you could come down to the station to answer some questions." This was a classic intimidation tactic, and I recognized it immediately. "I'll be happy to speak with you, Detective, but as an attorney, I'm sure you understand that I'll need to have my own legal representation present. How about tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.? There was a pause on the line. "This isn't a formal interrogation, Mr. Zimmerman, just routine questions." "Even so, I'll be exercising my right to counsel, unless you're planning to arrest me." "No, sir, not at this time." "Then I'll see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. I ended the call and immediately dialed my friend Nathan, a criminal defense attorney with whom I'd worked on several cases. "Nate, I need a favor," I began, explaining the situation. "Sounds like someone's trying to create a diversion," Nathan observed. "I'll be there with you tomorrow. In the meantime, document everything and don't discuss the case with anyone." I met James for lunch at a quiet cafe far from Whispering Pines. After reviewing the files Harold had provided, his interest was definitely piqued. "This goes beyond HOA politics," James agreed, scrolling through the financial records. "You've got potential wire fraud, misappropriation of funds, forgery, invasion of privacy. It's a prosecutor's buffet. The question is, what's the best way to proceed?" I asked. "I've been asked to come in for questioning tomorrow about a supposed break-in at the HOA office." James raised an eyebrow. "Convenient timing." "Exactly," I said. "I think Patty is trying to discredit me before I can expose what she's been doing. Let me take these files and start an official inquiry," James suggested. "Once the state attorney's office is involved, local police will be more cautious about pursuing questionable charges against a potential witness." I agreed, and we spent the rest of lunch discussing strategy. By the time we parted, I felt more confident that the truth would eventually come to light, but I was also aware that things would likely get worse before they got better. When I returned home that evening, I found a violation notice taped to my door. According to the official-looking document, my front lawn exceeded the maximum allowed height by a quarter-inch, and I had 24 hours to correct the violation or face a $100 fine. I took photos of my perfectly maintained lawn, removed the notice, and added it to my growing file of evidence. Then I checked my security cameras. The footage clearly showed Karen Williams, not an HOA employee or security guard, placing the notice on my door. Another violation of protocol to add to the list. My doorbell rang around 8 p.m. Through the video feed, I could see Olivia standing on my porch, looking agitated. "Have you seen this?" she demanded when I opened the door, thrusting her phone at me. On the screen was a community social media page with a post from Patty Anderson. "Urgent community alert. It has come to my attention that certain residents are attempting to undermine the stability and property values of our community by attacking your HOA board. These individuals, led by a homeowner with multiple uncorrected violations, are spreading false information and even resorting to criminal activities like breaking into the HOA office to steal records. Rest assured, your board is working with law enforcement to address these serious issues. In the meantime, please be vigilant and report any suspicious activities directly to me. She's rallying her troops, I said, handing the phone back to Olivia. It's working, Olivia replied. Comments are flooding in, people taking sides. Some are even suggesting a recall election for the entire board. That might not be a bad idea, I mused. A clean slate could be exactly what this community needs. Walter, someone spray-painted traitor on Harold's garage door tonight, Olivia said quietly. This is getting ugly fast. I invited her in, and we spent the next hour discussing the rapidly deteriorating situation in the neighborhood. Olivia, who worked in real estate, had her own concerns about Patty's leadership. Property values aren't up because of her enforcement, Olivia explained. They're up because of the new tech company that opened headquarters 10 miles away. But Patty's been taking credit and using it to justify her methods. By the time Olivia left, I had formulated a clearer plan. This wasn't just about my shed anymore. It was about restoring proper governance to our community and holding those responsible for misconduct accountable. The next morning, Nathan met me at my house, and we drove to the police station together. Detective Roberts was waiting for us in an interview room, along with another officer I didn't recognize. "Thank you for coming in, Mr. Zimmerman," Roberts began. "This is Officer Chen. We just have a few questions about the break-in at the HOA office Wednesday night." "Of course," I replied calmly. "Though I'm not sure how I can help since I was home all evening. Can anyone verify that?" Chen asked. "My security system can," I said. "I have cameras covering all entrances to my property, and they're motion activated. They'll show that I neither left my property nor had any visitors during the time frame in question." Roberts nodded slowly. "The break-in occurred between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., according to our preliminary investigation. Several files were reportedly taken, including some concerning your property." "That's interesting," I said, "especially since a staff member at the HOA office informed me that Patty Anderson was shredding documents the night before the alleged break-in." Both officers looked surprised at this information. "You have any evidence of that claim?" Roberts asked. "The staff member is willing to provide a statement," Nathan interjected. "And we're aware that the state attorney's office has opened an investigation into financial irregularities at the HOA." This was clearly news to the detectives. They exchanged glances before Roberts continued. "Mr. Zimmerman, can you think of anyone who might have wanted to break into the HOA office? Besides Patty Anderson creating a diversion to cover up evidence of her misconduct," I asked. "No, not really." "That's a serious accusation," Chen noted. "So is accusing me of breaking and entering," I countered. "Especially with no evidence beyond the fact that I've recently pressed charges against the HOA president for the exact same crime." The questioning continued for another 30 minutes, but it was clear that the detectives had little to go on. As Nathan and I were preparing to leave, I decided to provide them with copies of the violation notice Karen Williams had placed on my door and the security footage showing her doing so. "You might want to look into unauthorized individuals impersonating HOA officials," I suggested. "That seems to be a recurring problem in Whispering Pines lately." As we walked out of the station, Nathan shook his head. "They've got nothing." "That was a fishing expedition, probably instigated by your HOA president." "Ex-president," I corrected him. "And soon to be ex-neighbor if the criminal charges stick. Speaking of which," Nathan said. "Your preliminary hearing is scheduled for next week." The DA seems inclined to pursue this case, especially with the security footage you provided. And now, with the state attorney looking into financial improprieties, things might move even faster, I added. Nathan nodded in agreement. "I've seen HOA disputes before, but this is exceptional. Most HOA presidents know better than to cross the line into criminal behavior. Most HOA presidents aren't running side schemes using association funds," I pointed out. When I returned home, there was a crowd gathered near my house. As I approached, I realized they were clustered around my mailbox, which had been smashed flat, apparently by a vehicle. "It happened about an hour ago," my elderly neighbor Frank informed me. "Big pickup truck. Didn't get a license plate, but it was dark blue or black. Drove up on the curb deliberately." I sighed and called the police to report the vandalism. While waiting for them to arrive, I checked my phone and found dozens of notifications, emails, texts, and voicemails from neighbors taking sides in the escalating community conflict. One message in particular caught my attention. It was from a number I didn't recognize. "You should drop the charges if you know what's good for you and your property. This mailbox is just the beginning." I showed the message to the officer who responded to the vandalism call, who logged it as evidence and advised me to document any further threats. The next few days brought a flurry of activity. The state attorney's office executed a search warrant on the HOA office, seizing computers and files. Patty was called in for questioning. Harold convened another emergency board meeting, where he revealed some of the financial discrepancies he'd discovered, causing an uproar among homeowners. Through it all, the community remained divided. Some residents staunchly defended Patty, insisting that she was being persecuted for enforcing rules that everyone had agreed to follow. Others were outraged by the emerging evidence of misconduct and demanded immediate action. I kept my head down and focused on the legal aspects, working with James to ensure that all evidence was properly documented and preserved. The preliminary hearing for Patty, Tom, and Ryan was approaching, and I was determined to see it through. 3 days before the hearing, I received a call from Harold. His voice was tense. "Walter, we've got a problem. The board just received a letter from Patty's attorney. She's threatening to sue the HOA for wrongful termination and defamation unless we publicly support her and call for all charges to be dropped." "She doesn't have a case," I assured him. "She was removed from her position after being arrested for criminal activity related to her HOA duties." "That's completely justified. The problem is the legal costs," Harold explained. "If we fight this, even if we win, it could drain the HOA's reserves. Some board members are suggesting we take the deal." "That would be a mistake," I said firmly. "If you cave to this threat, you're essentially admitting that the board condones criminal behavior. Plus, it won't stop the state attorney's investigation or the criminal charges I've filed." Harold sighed heavily. "I know you're right, but I'm not sure I can convince the rest of the board." "Some of them are scared. Call an open meeting," I suggested. "Let the homeowners weigh in. I suspect most of them won't want their HOA dues used to defend someone who broke the law and misappropriated funds." The open meeting was scheduled for that evening. The community center was even more packed than the previous meeting, with homeowners spilling out into the hallway. The tension in the room was palpable as Harold explained Patty's legal threat and the board's dilemma. "Before we discuss our options," Harold concluded, "we'd like to hear from the community." The debate was heated. Karen Williams and Patty's other supporters argued vehemently that the board should accept the settlement offer to avoid costly litigation. Others insisted that principle mattered more than expense, When my turn came to speak, I approached the microphone calmly. "Many of you know me as the homeowner whose shed was broken into," I began. "But tonight, I'm speaking as a member of this community and as an attorney with experience in cases like this. The choice before the board isn't just about money, it's about what kind of community we want to be. Do we want to be a place where rules are applied fairly and transparently? Or one where those in power can break laws with impunity?" I paused to let that sink in before continuing. Patty Anderson broke into my shed because she believed that her position as HOA president placed her above the law. The evidence now suggests that she may have been engaged in financial impropriety as well. If the board surrenders to her legal threats, it sends a clear message that money matters more than justice. Karen Williams shouted from her seat. "Easy for you to say. You're not the one who will have to pay higher dues when the legal bills come due." "Actually," I countered, "I've spoken with several attorneys who would be willing to represent the HOA pro bono in this matter, myself included. This isn't about money, it's about standing up for what's right." That announcement changed the tenor of the discussion. By the end of the meeting, a clear majority of homeowners supported rejecting Patty's settlement offer and proceeding with both the criminal case and cooperation with the state attorney's investigation. As the crowd dispersed, Harold approached me with a relieved expression. "Thank you for offering to represent the HOA. That made all the difference." "I meant what I said," I told him. "This isn't about money anymore. It's about justice and proper governance." The preliminary hearing for Patty, Tom, and Ryan took place the following Monday at the county courthouse. I arrived early, accompanied by Nathan, who had insisted on being present even though I was technically just a witness rather than legal counsel in this phase. The courtroom was surprisingly crowded. Many Whispering Pines residents had shown up, along with local media who had picked up on the story of an HOA president arrested for breaking into a homeowner's shed. Patty arrived with her attorney, a well-known local lawyer named Richard Dawson, who specialized in defending white-collar criminals. She was dressed conservatively in a navy blue suit, her expression somber and dignified. Tom and Ryan entered separately with their own attorneys, both looking considerably more nervous than their former boss. Judge Michaela Hernandez called the court to order promptly at 9 a.m. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Lisa Petrova, outlined the charges: criminal trespassing, breaking and entering, destruction of property, and conspiracy. When it was the defense's turn, Richard Dawson portrayed Patty as a dedicated community servant who had simply been overzealous in her duties. Mrs. Anderson believed she was acting within her authority as HOA president, he insisted. "This is a case that belongs in civil court, not criminal court." Ada Petrova countered with the security footage, which clearly showed the deliberate breaking of the lock and Patty's dismissal of my explicit objections. "This wasn't a misunderstanding of authority," she argued. "It was a willful disregard for the law and the homeowner's rights." Judge Hernandez reviewed the evidence carefully before making her decision. "There is sufficient evidence to proceed to trial on all charges for all defendants," she ruled. "Bail will continue as previously set. Trial is scheduled for September 15th. As we exited the courtroom, a reporter from the local newspaper approached me. "Mr. Zimmerman, do you have a comment on the judge's decision to move forward with criminal charges?" "The law applies equally to everyone," I replied. "Being an HOA president doesn't grant immunity from breaking and entering statutes. Beyond that, I'll let the judicial process take its course." The reporter turned to Patty next, who surprised me by stepping forward eagerly. "This is a witch hunt orchestrated by homeowners who don't want to follow the rules they agreed to when they purchased their properties," she declared. The truth will come out at trial, and I look forward to being vindicated and restored to my rightful position as HOA president." As Patty and her attorney walked away, Nathan leaned close to me. "She's going to regret that statement when the state attorney's findings become public." He was right. The very next day, the state attorney's office announced formal charges against Patty for fraud, embezzlement, forgery, and misuse of HOA funds. According to the press release, forensic accounting had revealed over $200,000 in missing or misappropriated funds over the past year. The investigation had uncovered that Patty had created fake vendor companies, awarded them contracts at inflated prices, and then diverted the payments to personal accounts. She had also used HOA funds to pay for the unauthorized surveillance of problem homeowners who had opposed her in the board election or questioned her decisions. The community was stunned. Even Patty's most loyal supporters found it difficult to defend embezzlement. Karen Williams made a brief statement to the neighborhood social media group claiming that the charges were trumped up, but even she couldn't muster much conviction. In the wake of these revelations, the HOA board held an emergency session and voted to initiate a forensic audit of all finances for the past 3 years, the entire period during which Patty had been on the board in any capacity. They also voted to pursue civil charges to recover the misappropriated funds. I offered my legal services pro bono to help the HOA navigate the complex process ahead. Harold, who had been confirmed as the new president, gratefully accepted. "We need to rebuild trust," he said during our first strategy meeting. "The homeowners need to know that their money is being properly managed and that the rules will be enforced fairly going forward." I suggested a complete overhaul of the HOA's operating procedures, including greater transparency, stricter financial controls, and a new enforcement protocol that emphasized communication and cooperation rather than punitive measures. Over the next few weeks, the community began the slow process of healing. Special elections were held to fill vacant board positions, and a new spirit of collaboration emerged. Many homeowners who had never participated in HOA activities before stepped forward to volunteer for committees and attend meetings. As for Patty, Tom, and Ryan, their legal troubles continued to mount. Tom and Ryan eventually accepted plea deals, agreeing to testify against Patty in exchange for reduced charges. Patty maintained her innocence, insisting that she was being persecuted for doing her job too well. The criminal trial for the breaking and entering case proceeded as scheduled in September. With the security footage, my testimony, and the corroborating statements from Tom and Ryan, the prosecution's case was strong. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Judge Hernandez sentenced Patty to 18 months in prison, 3 years probation, and restitution for the damaged property. Tom and Ryan received suspended sentences and community service due to their cooperation. The fraud and embezzlement case took longer to come to trial, but the outcome was equally decisive. Faced with overwhelming evidence, including bank records, forged documents, and testimony from HOA staff, Patty was sentenced to an additional 5 years in prison and ordered to repay all misappropriated funds. By the following spring, Whispering Pines had transformed. The new board, led by Harold with assistance from a diverse group of homeowners, implemented the reforms we had developed together. Violation notices were now delivered by certified mail with clear photographic evidence of the issue. Inspections were conducted transparently, with homeowners present. Financial records were audited quarterly and made available to all community members online. My shed stood as it always had, now with a new, sturdier lock. The garden around it had expanded, with approval from the architectural committee, to include a small vegetable plot and a sitting area where I could enjoy the Florida sunshine. One evening, as I was watering my tomato plants, Olivia stopped by on her evening walk. "Hard to believe it's been almost a year since all that drama started," she remarked, leaning against the fence. "Sometimes the smallest things lead to the biggest changes," I replied, setting down my watering can. "You know, property values are still rising," Olivia noted with a smile. "Turns out you don't need a tyrant running the HOA to maintain a desirable community." "Who would have thought?" I chuckled. As Olivia continued on her walk, I surveyed my backyard, the shed that had inadvertently sparked a community revolution, the garden that would never have existed under Patty's regime, the neighbors who now waved and chatted instead of watching suspiciously for violations. Sometimes justice comes from unexpected places. In this case, it had come from a simple garden shed and an attorney who knew his rights. And in the end, our community was stronger for it.